key to what's been going on is this new bill in the UK called the Online Safety Bill, which is very similar to what a lot of different countries are now adopting that obviously are designed to have a very benign sounding name. Who's could possibly be against online safety? Everyone wants the society to be safe. Everybody loves safety for our children, for ourselves. So they call it the Online Safety Bill. It's, in their view, what they want you to think, designed to do nothing other than allow them to take the internet and make it a safer place for you. They're going to get rid of dangerous disinformation, things that are harmful to your children, any kind of hate speech. These are benevolent people who are just looking out for your own good. They're going to have the power to censor, but not for expunging political dissent or entrenching their own power. No, these are good people. These aren't people from like Iran or North Korea or Russia. These are the good people. These are the British and the Americans and the Norwegians and the Brazilians. These are the nice people who just want to help. And the British Online Safety Bill gave immense new powers to the British government to do exactly what all of these laws are intended, in fact, to do, which is empower the government and state officials to force internet companies to censor on their command, according to their guidelines, to take control of what had been called content moderation policies out of the hands of tech executives and put it into the hands of our political leaders. So it's now governments deciding what political views can and can't be heard online. There's no more conceit that this is all the decision-making of private corporations acting autonomously on their own. It's now just out in the open. That's what all these bills essentially are designed to do, is transfer this power to the state to control the flow of political information online. And when this bill was really picking up steam in the British Parliament, and when it became apparent that the establishment wings of both the Labour Party and the Tory Party were on board with it, The Economist, a very centrist news outlet that often is by no means a supporter of free speech absolutism, really sounded the alarm about how dangerous this bill would be. And I'm citing them on purpose because they do often sanction and support controlling the internet in the name of disinformation. But this bill went so far, and it's very illustrative of where these kinds of bills are going, that they really made clear how dangerous and despotic this online safety bill is. And this online safety bill has just passed, and the first thing they're doing with it is not only trying to force Rumble to banish Russell Brand from their platform, but threatening Rumble with banishment from the UK if it fails to comply. The ink on this law is not even dry, and they're already proving that the gravest worries of their opponents, such as The Economist, were not just valid and true, but if anything, understated. So here's what The Economist last year said, quote, there you see the headline, Britain's online safety bill could change the face of the internet. Tech firms will be incentivized to censor their users en masse. Quote, Britain's government likes to trumpet the benefit of free speech, announcing a bill designed to prevent stroppy students, quote, no platforming speakers at universities. Boris Johnson told his millions of Twitter followers last year, quote, freedom of speech is at the very core of our democracy. The Higher Education Freedom of Speech Bill was included in the Queen's Speech, which sets out the government's legislative agenda earlier this month. Outside the lecture hall, though, Mr. Johnson's government is accused of censorship in its own right. Also in the Queen's Speech was the Online Safety Bill, a bumper piece of legislation that will impose sweeping new obligations on search engines, social media sites, forums, video sites, and the like. Ministers say it is, quote, world-leading. At 225 pages with 194 separate clauses and with up to 25,000 firms potentially affected, everyone agrees it is ambitious. The arguments are about its consequences. To its defenders, the bill, whose origins date back to Theresa May's time as Prime Minister, remember her, is designed to make Britain, quote, the safest place in the world in which to use the internet. Do you see how they use the language of parental protection about how parents think of making the world safe for their children? They're talking here about adults. Obviously, they invoke children constantly, but it's a parental model that is in fact aimed at what kind of content adults can and cannot consume. No one in this case, for instance, is talking about making Russell Brand unavailable to children. They're demanding he be made unavailable, period, to not just children, but all adults. But obviously the pretext of the bill is to make the UK the safest place in the world in which to use the internet. The bill will impose a, quote, duty of care on tech firms, a concept that began in health and safety legislation for the workplace. Tech firms will be required by law to protect their British users from racism, death threats, sexual exploitation, dodgy advertisements, and much, much more. Civil libertarians are not happy. A legal opinion commissioned by the Index on Censorship, a charity, said the bill was likely to fall foul of the free speech provisions of the European Convention on Human Rights, to which Britain remains a signatory. Daniel Davis, a conservative MP, has described it as a, quote, censors charter that would, quote, strangle free speech online. The bill establishes several tiers of nastiness. The worst tier is reserved for things that are against existing law, such as assisting suicide, making threats to kill, or assisting illegal immigration. The biggest firms, the definition of big remains unclear, will have to proactively purge their site of such things. The sheer size of big platforms means that it is not feasible for humans to check every post. Firms will have to rely on automated enforcement. But algorithms are blunt tools, says Mark Johnson of Big Brother Watch, which campaigns on civil liberties. They often struggle with nuance and context. Is an algorithm going to be able to reliably tell the difference between someone encouraging suicide and someone with postnatal depression posting about feeling suicidal? With billions of dollars potentially at stake, he says, the risk is that firms will err heavily on the side of caution, leading to overzealous blocking of innocuous posts. So even for the well-intentioned part that says, oh, we want to make sure there's no post encouraging suicide or violence or sexual exploitation, even in the best of intentions, where a lot of people who hate censorship might agree that websites should not be able to encourage or allow speech that facilitates illegal behavior, even there, what's instead likely to happen, because there's no way to monitor the full volume, billions of posts flowing over sites like Facebook and Twitter and Google and increasingly growing sites like Rumble, is that artificial intelligence will be used, and it will be done to ensure that virtually everything that's even potentially controversial is banned, because the incentive with tech companies will always be to allow only the most tepid and most obviously safe messages to be heard. I love Joe Biden. I'm here to cheerlead for the British Prime Minister. I love flowers. My favorite color is blue. Anything that is even slightly edgier than that is subject to being swept up in what will obviously be, by design, an overly zealous censorship regime that is being implemented by these tech companies out of fear that they will run afoul of these laws and their highly punitive fines. That's the best intentioned part of this law. Here's how much worse it is. Quote, a second tier of content concerns posts that are not in themselves illegal, but which are determined to be harmful. Exactly what belongs in that category is unclear. It is left for ministers to decide later. But the government has talked about everything from vaccine skepticism and bullying to glorifying anorexia and hurling racist insults at Europe's football teams. Sites will be required by law to minimize the chance that children see such posts. For everyone else, they will have to make an active decision about whether to block or downplay such content, or to carry on promoting and recommending it as they would anything else on their products. Campaigners argue that these, quote, legal but harmful provisions amount to censorship by the back door and create an entirely new category of speech in law. You may remember that the new CEO of Twitter, Linda Yaccarino, created a lot of controversy and a lot of suspicion about Twitter's commitment to free speech when she recently spoke at a panel, and she described essentially exactly this framework, where she called a category of speech lawful but awful, meaning it doesn't fall into that first category of encouraging child pornography or violence or suicide, but instead it's this kind of this amorphous middle ground, where maybe it's the sort of thing that has opinions that are bad, like vaccine skepticism, and even though it's not illegal, it's still awful, and therefore, she said, Twitter will do everything possible to minimize its spread. That's what this law requires these sites to do for this, what's called this new backdoor of censorship, where they're admitting the speech isn't illegal, but because it's, quote, awful to whoever's deciding that, it nonetheless has to be minimized or its spread impeded. Ruth Smeeth, a former MP and the boss of Index on Censorship, calls these provisions, quote, a clusterfuck. The government has tried to reassure doubters by pointing out that tech firms will be free to leave such posts up if they choose. Ms. Smeeth is dismissive. Quote, can you imagine the political pressure on any platform that publicly says they're okay with this stuff? Those that decide to suppress it will again depend on idiot savant algorithms. This could have international repercussions. Tech firms may choose to try to apply the new law in Britain only. If they decide that it is too difficult to create a new set of rules for a subset of their users, one option is to apply at least some of the law's provisions to their services anywhere. There is precedent. Last year, Britain brought in the age-appropriate design code, which prescribes stricter privacy for children online. Google, TikTok, and others made worldwide changes as a result. In other words, once a country goes further than any other to impose censorship or to make a freedom of speech regimen more restricted than anywhere else, companies to comply won't do the work or spend the money to comply only for that country. They'll change their laws, their rules to make that censorship regime applicable in all countries because it's easier to do. So every time one country goes a bit further in its censorship requirements than any other, it doesn't just affect the people in the country that did that. It also affects everybody everywhere, including people who have no control over those governments, because these tech firms will comply on an international basis, assuming they don't care about free speech, which is true of Google and TikTok and Facebook, and will impose the censorship on everybody. Quote, another possibility is that some foreign firms, particularly smaller ones, may stop serving Britain entirely. In various ways, the price of safety may be silence. So that was the law, and it was one that The Economist, I think, did a very good job of dissecting and laying out the dangers of. And yet here we are now, September 19, 2023, just this week, right around the time that these Russell Brand accusations emerged. There you see from Reuters, the UK's online safety bill is finally passed by Parliament. It was just passed this week. And before the ink is dry, before His Majesty has even given the royal assent, as I'm about to show you, British media outlets and politicians are saying, Rumble, we have this new law in our hands, and if you don't start obeying in the way that YouTube did without even asking, you may be banished from Britain. In fact, your executives may be subject to arrest if they try and enter the UK under this new powerful law that we have in our hand, one that they, of course, pretended was so innocuous in order to get it passed. Here's Reuters, quote, Britain's long-awaited online safety bill, setting tougher standards for social media platforms such as Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok, has been agreed by Parliament and will soon become the law, the government said on Tuesday. Technology Secretary Michelle Donlan said the bill was a, quote, game-changing piece of legislation. Do you see how they boast about how unprecedented these new frameworks are? Quote, today this government is taking an enormous step forward in our mission to make the UK the safest place in the world to be online, she said. If companies do not comply, media regulator Ofcom will be able to issue fines of up to £18 million, $22.3 million, or 10% of their annual global turnover. Now, given the magnitude of that kind of punishment, do you think any company other than Rumble and maybe Twitter, depending on their commitment, is going to risk the punishments necessary to defy these governments, or simply decide I'd rather not do business in a country that forces me to deny to my adult users political content that they want to see simply because the government orders me to censor? Now, we're seeing how dangerous this is in a very concrete example. I don't have to speak in the abstract here. I don't have to speak about the possibilities of this danger. I don't have to warn of the obvious slippery slope. We're seeing already how repressive this has made the UK and the US media, now desperate to punish Rumble for its defiance of doing what it's told. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.